Hi, everybody. This is David, and welcome to Education 506. Inclusion of students with special needs. 2 credits, Viterbo University. This is our Module 2 Fireside Chat. So recording live down here in what is also known as the Safety Doc Podcast Studio. For those of you that didn't see in my bio or links posted above, I do a weekly show out of Los Angeles, California. You can find it, just go up above, or if you go on Twitter at SafetyPhD or SafetyPhD.com. There's a lot of stuff about school safety, but just not exclusive to school safety in there. All right, enough of that. Let's get back to the Fireside Chat. So how this will work, I do have a couple pages of notes that I took. I read through post after post after post, and each of you has a shout out specific to a post that you've made. So I'll be going through those today. We're going to do a little bit of a reflection back on Module 1. I'm going to talk a little bit about Module 2 and just kind of how the class is going. So this is the Fireside Chat. It's live, and it is going to take what you have posted, and I'm going to pull pieces of that out and have a discussion. So well worth your time. If there is one area of class you really want to focus on, I would say make sure that you take the time to listen to each Fireside Chat posted in this module and, of course, the upcoming modules. So Module 1 review, the WEAC article. First of all, now in Module 2, we have an article from Journ, which is more of a research article about inclusion. But the WEAC article, a lot of you had different reactions to that, which is great because it's a surface article. It's the article that you find when you're on the net and you're typing in inclusion and you just want to learn some of the basic information about inclusion. But this is the information that most people will take and then they'll run with it. They don't go deeper than this. So you could see from the WEAC article that a few things with that. It's one source. It's one source. So, and then the WEAC article itself tended to cite, some legal cases, but to me it kind of overshot some of the significant cases to deal with inclusion, Brown versus Board of Education and some of the others. It got into some very kind of fragmented cases like the Wisconsin Dells one. But I think the caution here, though, is, when we talk about inclusion, we talk about mainstreaming, if you just look at that article, you have that perspective. And you might think, I know quite a bit about it now. Take that and then couple it with the presentation I gave for the Module 1 Fireside Chat. Now add in the Journ article from Module 2, and you start to see different angles, and you're informed much more thoroughly on what is inclusion, what is mainstreaming, and not only advantages, but possible disadvantages, and what does the research really say. So there's so many times I've gotten to be very acute in my listening to people who tend to put a statistic out there or put a position without really identifying your research base. I have a friend, that very popular podcaster, and he will always say, according to these 3 research articles or this Bureau of Labor Statistics plus this, this is what I'm basing my conclusions off of. So you could pull in other data and come to a different set of conclusions, but this is what I'm using. And I really give him credit for that, and that's one of the things, again, I want you to pull out of Module 1 is I think how you're informed about what is inclusion and what is mainstreaming and what is acceptance and tolerance. And not only like you, not just you, but think of parents, think of school board members. You just get elected to the school board and you come on, they kind of, put you through this fast, course of here's policies and procedures. But a lot of people that get voted into school board positions have to learn about inclusion and mainstreaming and things like that. So just that you're using different sources to educate and to have discussions about those. So continue to be active posters. Check the class, every couple days, but be active posters. If you've made 3-4 posts, that's not enough. You need to be making, every module, 8 to 10 posts. And you can get in and do that. That's well, and a number of you have been doing that. Module 2. So we're in Module 2, examining the origins and evolution of inclusive practices. So again, that Journ research article, that's just one. You can go to journ.org, JURN.org. I recommend that. You go there, you can type in like inclusion plus, students with special needs and whatever, and you're going to find research articles. Journ does a great job of pulling like dissertation type work, so it's very fresh, and it also isn't manipulated by being paid for by a company or something like that. It doesn't have usually an agenda behind it. If you go into Google Scholar, one of the things I found, and when I did my research from UW-Madison and do my research now for other things, I just don't use Google Scholar because two things tend to happen. One is the articles tend to be more newspaper, magazine-ish, or to get down to quality research, they end up saying, here it is. If you pay us $15, we'll give you more than the first 3 paragraphs. And Journ doesn't play those games. So if you're involved in any research at all, whether it be for your classes or just for anything that you're looking up for your instructive practices, if you want to learn more about whatever from a research perspective, check out Journ. So Ro Vargo, we're introduced to Ro Vargo. In our book, Voice of Inclusion, you're going to be fascinated by Ro, and Ro's story will be very, very moving. Why I like this book, and this book will only be used. The book I think came out in 2005, still very relevant. I go through it, but I am sunsetting it and bringing in a new book for probably spring. So this book is kind of on its way out, but still very relevant. And I like the book because it tells the stories. It's the qualitative side. It doesn't throw all these statistics and things like that. It tells these stories, and Ro, and there's others that we'll learn about as we go in to additional modules and additional readings. So Ro Vargo, and you have a link to the interactive timeline of special education. I have it up on the screen to my left. I have the module up. And interesting, special education. But if we go back to the origins and we start looking at inclusive type practices, or at least providing some level of service to people with special needs, the timeline starts at 1784. Very, very interesting. You have an assignment due in this module. It is your inclusion timeline. I included, I think 2 samples. Yeah, 2 samples. One is actually, I gave you 3. So, but one is somebody came up a few classes ago with the inclusive history of making dolls, and actually talked about how there was a polio doll that came out, and then American Girl had a doll with a hearing aid. So that was a really fascinating way to look at inclusion. Someone did inclusion in movies. For those of you who haven't been paying close attention, movies have really done a lot, kids' movies, to positively portray disabilities, differences. I'll just get into a couple examples. One of my favorite movies, Wreck-It Ralph. Vanellope has Pixlexia. I'm trying to quote so it goes on the screen here. All right. But really, so it indicates that it's similar to having a seizure, type disorder, like epilepsy, and her struggles, through that, yet her triumphs through that. It's just who she is. And then of course Wreck-It Ralph of being larger than other people. And we go to Nemo. Nemo had the small fin. And it is, again, just amazing to go through and to watch the new, and especially the second, Finding Dory, with the octopus that was missing a tentacle and so forth. I think there's been really some great messages sent subtly to kids and also to adults. But I really like these movies and what what's being portrayed and how it's being portrayed. So, but anyway, here's the deal. You can do this any way you want. You can approach this from any angle. Now, some people go and do history and they'll look at, here's like laws that impact it. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, that's a pretty well-traveled path. So if you do that, try to find maybe something that might be a little bit more obscure and, that you want to bring in. Oh, we got an incoming phone call. It is a private caller, so we will let that one go. All right, I have no way to shut this thing off down here. So, and all right, we could have put him on the air. Probably what we should have done. Should have taken the phone call, put it on speakerphone, say, hey, you are live during the Fireside Chat for Module 2. What do you have to say? Next call comes in, we're going to do that. Okay. So take the inclusion timeline and figure out, you can span 5 years, you can span, 150 years. Somebody did an inclusive practices timeline, and they looked at just like the last 5 years in technology, and it was fascinating. And like the one of the things was basically all smartphones being created with text to speech for dictating. Like that was just standard, and just these built-in things and some other stuff. I mean, it was phenomenal, and it was powerful. And the person wrote a little preface before it saying, I could take this and it could be even more significant. We could go back 20 years to what technology was, but I just want to show you how fast technology has moved to be more inclusive, and really made the point by doing that. So whatever you want to come up with, be creative. I like, if you include some images, I think that helps tell the story. But yeah, go for it. So I want to talk about what inclusion, what an example of inclusion was for me when I was growing up. And then we're going to get into our shout-outs, and that's how we will end the Fireside Chat. But when I grew up, I attended a K-8 building, and it was literally 100 years old back then. So, we're talking, I'm in elementary school, like late 70s. And this brick built, it had been added on to, but like the core of it, I think was like 4 stories tall, and no elevator. But anyway, one day I was I believe in 3rd grade. Yes, I was in 3rd grade, and suddenly outside the back door of the school, there was area of land on the block, and This yellow mobile home was positioned just outside the back door of the school. And just one day it was there, like no prep, nothing, and boom, it's there. And then this yellow mobile home, and within, a couple of days, the little a ramp is put in. There's no sign, doesn't say what this thing is. And the ramp then comes out to probably within about 10 feet of this back door of the school. And so it's there. Nobody has an idea. And it's really weird. It's this yellow mobile home next to this like ancient red brick building. So, I mean, if it doesn't stand out, I don't know what does. And I'm in class, and all of a sudden, shortly afterwards, a couple of my peers start to disappear. Gone. One was John. My friend John is gone. So hey, we just got in from recess. John's desk is empty. What's the deal? What's the deal? He's not here. And then all of a sudden, it'd get to be before lunch. John came back into class, and he would give me these amazing stickers. And by the way, like the studio mic and all this is for the show. Like I've literally got thousands of dollars of equipment down here and things like that. So, we benefit, I use this equipment for the Fireside chat, but anyway, so he gives me these really cool stickers, but I don't ask like where they come from. Where'd you get these stickers, John? So, shows up with these stickers, and that just kept happening. And other people disappeared, other classmates, and they'd reappear, and nobody said anything. Teacher never said anything. Classmates never said anything. And it was later on, I don't know what point, I learned that was the special ed building is what it was called. It referred to, so the yellow mobile home was all of that's when special education really, started to be incorporated into schools. So it was all pull-out, 100% pull-out. There was no disability awareness, no awareness of what special education was. Now, with that said, that's not a knock. That's just the way it was done, I think, everywhere back then. I believe that, it wasn't really stigmatized. I mean, people just didn't understand. And it was very mysterious. It was very mysterious. And I remember that. And it wasn't until I got to high school when there was actually a room identified outside the door with big letters. All the rooms are labeled as special ed. That, some kids went to the special ed room. Well, then, you kind of had an idea, and there was more talk of what it was. And it was like those students. And again, it was evolving. But yeah, it was really strange. The yellow mobile, I'll never forget it, and the mystery that went with it, and just how long that secret stayed, of where nobody came in and just said, "Hey, by the way, you've I just got to move something here. But by the way, you might have noticed there's a building out back, and we have some students who are receiving some different services in that building, and so they're going to be there for parts of their day and whatever." I mean, I think all of us would have been like, okay, we can kind of make sense of that. But I mean, it was this mystery, and so yeah, kind of my first experience with inclusion. And again, my friend John never said anything out, and I never asked him. I mean, I guess I was never, I don't know. I was never curious. So one more story about that school. There was an 8th grade boy. His name was Mike, and had some kind of what was called a fragile bone disease. That's all we knew it as kids, because we knew you weren't supposed to toss a ball to Mike or do anything like that. He was in a wheelchair, and he was very small, although he was an 8th grader, and had normal intellect, and was actually held. I mean, we respected him. He was an 8th grader, and he'd be outside at recess and things like that. He was a nice kid, but the way they would get Mike, so upstairs was grade 6, 7, 8, like 4 stories up. And so they would take Mike. There would be 2 8th grade boys, one on each side of his wheelchair. They would grab the wheel and grab the back, and they would zip him up and down the stairs, like sometimes 4 flights of stairs, because the lunchroom and the gym were on the bottom level, like 4 flights down. And these are pretty steep flights, and some of them are like wooden. It's things you could never do today. And it worked. I mean, that again was the way things were done. And again, I never knew the condition, but yeah, Mike. And the strange thing with Mike though is he commanded respect. I mean, he was a sharp kid. He was a really intellectual. I remember, but I was probably maybe 3rd grade when he was 8th or anything. But you definitely looked up to Mike, when he was outside and things like that. let's do some shout outs, student shout outs. So what I'm going to do is your first name, because this is on the web. I might do like a last initial for some of you, but Dustin B. Okay, Dustin. Dustin, you wrote families with, now, before I get into this, like sometimes what I write, when I go back, I'm like, what did I write? And my daughters are calling me out for that more and more. You know, like the weekly shopping list that's on the side of the fridge. They're like, what is this? I'm like, that's cereal. That's what it is. So it doesn't look like that. Looks like sardines. I'm like, we'll put those on the list too. Okay. So Dustin, you wrote families with disabilities. So families with students with disabilities. The last thing they want is their child to experience being tested and analyzed. And yeah, you're right. And the first thing they want is for their child to have friends. That's like their number one. That's their number one, is that their child has friends. So yeah, and the other part is, so, you know, this whole thing of like testing students with disabilities, they don't understand why they're being tested, and they don't understand the purpose of testing. And as adults, I mean, do we also know the purpose of testing? Some of it's state mandated. And I'm not going to go down a road of test bashing, but I think we do need to explain and take our time with students with disabilities to explain why we are testing, and then also to help them to recognize what we're trying to learn from the test, but then also how we learn in different ways about them. Like, you know, you do this, and you know, we do these things, and this is how we learn more about you. Otherwise, students can kind of just get hooked on a score, or, you know, it gets really, you're right, the testing thing gets really weird. And the same thing with parents. Like they look at it, and it's like, as soon as they see the score on the test, it's like, boom, like, what does this mean? And then that's like, they go from there, oh my goodness, or, you know, whatever. And we need to look at skills and look at growth, and not just testing. But I think helping students, like understanding, you know, why we test. No one ever, you and I mean, have we ever had that? I don't recall that. I don't recall that ever, like anyone. I remember one time in high school, like we had 2 days of testing, and, you know, I think if they didn't tell us ahead of time because they didn't want us to be like, oh, just came in one day. It's like, hey, everybody report to like this room. Like, it was we only had 44 kids in my class, small high school, but we're like, oh goodness. So yeah, Dustin, I appreciate that. Justin C. Justin, for the Goals of Public Ed discussion thread, you wrote, we may not all be destined to be Michelangelos or Einsteins, but each of us has a gift. Yes. And if you've seen my artwork, I am not a Michelangelo. So absolutely great point. Yeah. And I think we also, so you're talking about Michelangelo and Einstein. I think there's another part here I want to expand upon. And we need to be aware of the role models that we are putting out in our schools for kids. Here's why I say this. As soon as I read this, I thought of something. I remember, you know, when I was a school administrator, walking in, and, you know, this wasn't real long ago, but walking into a library at one of the schools, and the library had pictures all around it. I mean, like every wall. And it was, you know, each picture was, you know, largely, it was like a George Washington, you know, Jefferson Davis, you know, Lincoln and stuff like that. And there wasn't actually one that was female, and there wasn't one that was non-white. And I looked at that, and no one ever kind of thought about it. It wasn't just presidents. I can't remember the whole thing at the time, but you know, role models can be. Let me branch on this. There was a school that brought back graduates to talk to students, and the graduates would say, here's what I'm doing, and here's how school, what I remember from school, what was important, what wasn't as important, or whatever. But it was kids who had gone on, and some were students with disabilities, and they would come back and identify and say, I had a learning disability and whatever, and now I do this. And it was really cool to see, for kids to see out, to almost project the possibilities, and not necessarily if you have a disability, this is your path or whatever. But it was really neat though to see that, and I think they even brought back someone that didn't graduate and then went to the alt program and got their degree. He started, let me think this out a little bit. He started some kind of company manufacturing, it was like a stainless steel product that was needed in the agriculture industry, and basically created his own company and employed several people and things like that, but had dropped out of school. And I remember, this was a little fuzzy for me, but I remember when he came back, he wasn't regretting not going to college, but he said when he was in school, he wished he would have taken more business classes, or that there would have probably been more opportunity to role model with someone who had some business, like a business apprenticeship or things like that. So I don't know what was available at the time. And again, this wasn't like the school that I attended, but just thought it was interesting. So again, I think what you wrote is each of us has a gift, and that gift sometimes isn't discovered until later on. It's some people don't realize those things. And I think time, I think what we're exposed to in life and just natural growth reveal a lot of those things. I mean, how many of us at age 18 versus 25, just the difference in that. Probably the most important thing too is reconnaissance. Let kids get out and see the world, start to learn, what their gifts are. So, Brendan C. So Brendan, again, for goals of education, you wrote, I think the community sees the public schools as a target for violence and safety concerns. My response to that is, yeah, I think you're right, and most of that is rhetoric. Most of that's inaccurate from a standpoint that Cornell University did a study. Again, I've presented on national television about this, but the likelihood, for example, of a school shooting at any school is once every 13,280 years. Yet, a recent study out of, I think it was George Washington University, or it was Harvard, indicated that a third of high school parents expect that there to be a shooting at their child's school in this upcoming school year. So it's just the perception and is so influenced by media rhetoric, and once we get into that too, it also I think refocus. It takes resources and takes time away from inclusive practices. We have people spending literally millions of dollars retrofitting doors and fortifying schools when we know statistically that does very little to improve school safety, but we know actually that an inclusive school environment with school connectedness has a huge impact on school safety, school attendance, decreasing truancy, decreasing drug use, and things like that. So, I think perception is a big barrier, and it contains a lot of myths, and they're propagated, through the media, and ultimately those, the attention that gets put to those I think limits inclusive practices. It also could get scary. After school shootings, there are some schools who want to quote unquote screen out the kids who could be the school shooters, and so they're looking maybe for kids with emotional behavioral disabilities, mental a kid that might have anxiety, or a student presenting as goth, and saying that's it. They're more likely. Statistically, absolutely not. There's no profile for a school shooter, but it really fractures inclusive practices. Robin, I'm glad to see you started to post to class. Continue to be an active poster. I had to look up the Bernese dogs. I wasn't sure exactly what those were. So, Allie H. For the goal of public ed, you wrote, as a parent, I would want my child to feel safe and comfortable expressing his or her thoughts respectfully without fear of failure or judgment. So I want to open up the discussion on this. So the fact is, failure, I don't think is anything we should protect kids from. Meaning, everybody fails. But failing is learning. It's an opportunity for learning. Now, if you perpetually put a child in a situation where they fail over and over and over again, that's not obviously good. But if a child tries to do something and doesn't succeed at it, if the rigor is just it's beyond their reach and you have to recalibrate it, it's perseverance. It is life. Again, life has failures. Anyone that plays sports, that there are games you're going to win and games you're going to lose, games you'll play well, games you don't. I think what you look for is performance over time and help kids see that too, and not to get too wrapped up into any single instant or event. So if you don't do well on a test, or this is also if you have a friendship that breaks up during school. So I think we need to embrace failure as learning. But again, I'm not saying like perpetual failure, because that's not right. None of us would want that. I had part of this too, I think, comes with perspective taking. I worked with a student who she was always right no matter what. And she was a great kid, worked hard on the yearbook, but would overpower the other members of the yearbook. So meaning, like, if she thought the layout on this page should have 3 images, and others would say, well, why don't we just do like 2 and then we can do, and she'd be like, no, it has to be like this way. And she would totally shut down their arguments, even if they were valid, didn't matter. And one of the things I worked with her on with her IEP goals, was perspective taking, of understanding others' perspectives. And actually, we know that's something that people today don't do as well as they did years ago. They don't take perspectives very efficiently. Part of that is we just don't read for leisure as much, so you're not putting yourself in the mindset of others on how they see things, and that's a big part of it. But it's this very much posturing too in the media of like either you're right or you're wrong. And if you go back, to like debate teams in the 1960s and 50s and things like that, and with Aristotle and Socrates and things like that, the art of debate was really knowing the other side, their position, and why they had the position as well as they did, so you could articulate it and then try to introduce new information to inform them of a different way to look at it and hopefully change their position. But you weren't like just attacking or dismissing a position. So yeah, failure's been stigmatized, but to protect kids from failure, there's an episode, one of my kids' favorite show is Henry Danger. It's on Nickelodeon. I actually like it too. And there's an episode where they have, you can type this in Henry Danger Nickelodeon, you can probably find it. And Henry is coaching basketball, like middle school basketball, and the team gets to be too good, so the athletic board, and this is all, this is in this Nick show, but the athletic board comes in and they lower the hoop for the other team to make it fair because they don't want anyone to feel bad, so they alter the game. But so Skylar H. For goals of public education, you wrote, some believe that public education should cater towards what potential jobs are available in society. So, yeah, true. And this can be very community specific. So I worked in a community that had a very large industrial complex and very much wanted to have core jobs replicated in the school, like basically in shop classes to help kids like prepare if they wanted to get into this path to like go into this. Well, the up and downside of that is they were really powerful on that. And when it came to like a referendum to expand out the distance learning lab, and since technology's advanced, but that time it was to expand a distance learning lab at high school so students could take classes in German or something like that they otherwise couldn't take because the school didn't offer it. Well, that wasn't supported by the community. What was actually stated was, hey, we have like these jobs here, and we don't need kids to learn about like and prepare for a lot of the world. So this was actually said like at meetings, like community forums I attended. And it was just that people were very centric. They had grown up, they had lived there. This is what their employment was. But the reality was, they were good paying jobs. They're still in that community, but not everybody was going to work at those jobs. And even those jobs would have to, advance and be able to work in a global community. So it's very, very tricky. And it's really hard to predict what's going to be out there too, because what jobs, are going to be there in 5 years or 10 years. I mean, things that we never even thought. For example, I interviewed for my radio show a commercial drone operator. Well, 10 years ago, who would have thought that job would have existed? And that's what he does now. It's a job. And so he has, these drones, and he has contracts to inspect like bridges. So he gets like the video, and then that gets provided to an engineer, and then he does for realtors. It's a big thing. So if commercially to sell, there's a whole bunch of laws with this too. It's like you just as a hobbyist can't go out and take these images legally and then sell them. So, but he has a lot of business from realtors. So they'll have a property and he'll go up and do video images and of different angles of it. And especially if it's like several acres, he can fly out, zoom, a mile and be back and get this footage. And he said, it really helps, of course, the sales. But he's 29, and he talked about when he graduated high school, like, that stuff was the only thing you really knew about drones was there were military drones, and they were huge. You'd seen some on TV, but one of the drones he brought, and we did actually film it. I mean, you can find this stuff on my show a few episodes back, but it was like the size of my hand. It was just unbelievable. So, but anyway, like that's his job. And we don't know what jobs will be automated. So again, I think it's, we need to teach skills of communicating. Also important to look to the technology, trends. And I think we're getting better at that too, of trying to look and see what's emerging out there for technology. Fascinating. So thank you, Skylar. Selena J. Selena. For goals of public ed, you responded to a post that Danny made, and you said, I agree with you that students should be taught about personal finance. So great point to bring that up, because here we are at a point when Equivest, the people that give us our credit score ratings, had half of their numbers compromised or something like that, or, our personal information out there. not only that, but I remember like my first couple weeks on college campus, when I got out of high school. I mean, it was like, here, sign up for this credit card, and here's a T-shirt. And like one of my roommates did. So you have like 3 T-shirts, and he's like, hey, I got these cards. And, it's like, whoa, at, 25% interest and all the other stuff. But yeah, the personal finance being absolutely huge, and an area that is for all students. All students, we need to spend time on that. I think there's another part of this. So your personal finance. I think another part of this is to help students understand truth from rhetoric. So even like if it's the news, a newspaper, or if it's an article online, if it's a news broadcast, like what of that is really subjective and what's objective and what's empirical? I mean, these are big kind of terms, but like I've worked with high school students and they've been able to put this together pretty well. And saying, yeah, that's like that person's opinion. That's like, so I think it's really important to help separate truth from rhetoric, because almost every commercial for any product is rhetoric, that it's going to have this effect or it's going to be this much fun or whatever it is. I mean, that's mostly just rhetoric. But yeah, if we want to get into truth, I mean, truth is like asking how many students that go into this program graduate and get jobs in this field, not like that just come out and are employed. So, but yeah, I think that starts with that whole, what is subjective, what is objective, and a critical eye on the news. So yeah, again, we are a very marketed to consumer society, and the marketers have gotten really good at this, that, we have to buy X, Y, Z. Lisa K. Lisa, in response to the WEAC article, you wrote, on the surface, the idea of inclusion seems like a pretty cut and dry issue. On the surface, it does. And really, you're either for or against it. Okay, those are the two positions. And I've seen those play out between teachers and, for example, regular education teachers. I saw this in a district where they said we don't want students with disabilities to be counted on honor roll at high school, we don't want them counted in class rank. So if you have a disability and you have any type of accommodation or special education class, modified grading, you won't. Well, eventually that was worked out, so that's not how that played out in that district. But there does seem to be this for and against, and school boards even get that way. Like school boards, especially newer school board members, might come in and look and say, wow, it looks like we're spending a lot of money on special education services, students with special needs, which there is a large amount that's allocated to that through IDEA funding and through state funding, and district funding goes into that. And they'll say, maybe we need to reduce this, because we need to put it more where we're going to have our college-bound students. It's like, whoa, But again, this is usually from a position that isn't very informed. And again, I've seen that play out. I think we need to view, this needs to be a non-negotiable. One is like inclusion needs to be a human right. Our attempt to have people kids and people in general included as much as possible needs to be a human right. Now, there's sometimes that's just not going to work, but the fact that we try needs to be the human right, that we put forward a true, sincere effort. And, when people are against inclusion, sometimes it is simply for the fact that they're scared. They don't have the knowledge. So there's a student with autism or an adult with autism, they are apprehensive. They don't know, they're not interacting with that person. And I remember, when you talk about inclusion, seems pretty cut and dry on the surface. I remember a student with very high needs disabilities, a kindergarten student, when I worked with CESA, so we served a lot of small districts. Student with these really significant disabilities moved into a small district. This district had never seen anything like this before, as far as like the level of needs. I think this kid had a full-time nurse and some other things. And one of the best teachers that served, our younger students was pretty distant, as the student came in the district, and someone who was really like a leader and had been in the district a long time, and kind of removed herself from a lot of the services, and probably should have been more integral. And a couple days later, this staff member came to me and said, I'm feeling bad about this. Here's what's happening, Dave. Like, I've never worked with a student with these types of needs before. Like, I want to work with a student. Like, I go home at night, I feel bad because I don't know how to work with a student. And I don't want to do anything wrong, and I don't know even where to start. Like, it was like even like getting the student just to raise a hand or raise a few fingers would just be a goal. I mean, it had to be that far down to have some indication of communication, or maybe that the student would tolerate, allowing a jacket to be put on and off. So once that teacher said that, I said, I think everybody feels the same way, and so do I. I mean, but it's one of these things, once we get in and work with a student, we'll learn, and we'll start to figure it out, and it's not going to be that every step will be the right step. We'll try some things that'll work, try some things that we'll modify. And we got together as a team, and I said, let me just facilitate a conversation. And kind of within a minute, everyone's like, yeah, I'm not really sure. But, we have our knowledge. We've educated students. This is a student. We're going to break through and find what works best. And here's where our baseline might be. I mean, it might be that the student is going to, just maintain eye contact for X number of seconds, or tolerate, having some parallel play or something like that, whatever it was. And it was really cool, because then like the whole team was there and they were empowered. But even people that very veteran staff member, I think anybody can be kind of set back a little bit when you're not informed. Jared M. In a thread follow-up response regarding the goals of inclusion, you wrote, in fact, special needs people desire to be in relationships, pursue hobbies, and have careers. So, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we kind of forget this. It's like, well, once you become special ed, you have that special ed label, well, then the bar gets lowered, and you're not going to do this and you're not going to do that. And it's like, no, we got to get away from that. And there's an example. When I was in one of the districts that I served, a freshman boy with Down syndrome. Okay, cool kid. But he had his feet up on a lunch table, during lunchtime in the commons area. And if you do that, that's an automatic detention. Okay, for anybody. But the principal didn't give him a detention. Said, you can't do this. And I think the kid did it again and told him again, you can't do it. And then he didn't do it. And I don't know. I think the kid's teacher wrote a note, home, and just said, hey, he did this today, if you can remind him. The parent came in and wanted to meet with the principal and wanted to meet with me as my oversight in special education services. And parent was very cordial, and just said, you know what? I want my child to have the experience of consequences. So if the feet are up on the table, then he's here for detention, and you give him detention, and he'll serve it, and I will come and pick him up. And she was very adamant, that her child not receive any of these passes because of the disability, because she said he knows not to do that. He doesn't do that at home, and he knows he shouldn't have done it here. And so yeah, and I thought that was really cool of that mom to do that. So he ended up with a detention. Danielle, or Danny N. Okay. Your Fireside Chat reflection. You wrote, lately in the news, I have been hearing and reading about people's beliefs that we are taught to hate. So basically that when you're young, you don't hate. It's when you get older, when you hear it from adults, others around you, that you learn the differences. And, that's true. I remember a rural school district that had a kindergarten class. A girl was adopted into this kindergarten class, completely blind. And again, completely new for the school. I was there her first day. She started out. And none of the teachers did a nice job preparing for it. And it was, we talked ahead of time, like, how do we want to do this? And we decided, and very experienced teacher, and we said, let's just see what happens. If the kids have questions, the teacher was going to ask the questions, but she said, so this girl comes in and finds her spot, and gets some assistance with that. And really, by about the middle of the day, other students were playing with her. Like, there was a elevated sandbox in the class. Students were showing her the recess equipment. They were kind of figuring out, if anything, they started to do maybe a little too much for her, and the teacher said, no, she can put her, jacket on, and you can, so it was kind of watching what the students would do, and then the teacher stepping in and just making sure. But if anything, they just wrapped around and kind of protected and accepted her. And that was the coolest thing. And this behavior, it's interesting because it can be also repressed. And an example, so we had Hurricane Harvey that hit Houston a couple weeks ago, and the Cajun Navy, a civilian group, comes to the rescue, or is one rescue group, basically coming in with their boats. They're civilians. They're loosely organized. They come together, and whatever calls for help that they're getting, and a lot were through social media, they're going out and they're doing rescues, or they're going neighborhood to neighborhood in no particular manner, and they're going, home to home, and they're checking. And it has nothing to do with socioeconomic status or with race or anything like that. They're just there to help. So we can supersede these things, but yeah, they're definitely very, very thick. I mean, we saw, just the Charlotte, riots, are an example of the tension that's out there. So, but what does it mean? What does it mean for inclusion? And I think the more we learn again about other people, and what people, boy, that's, it's a tough one, because sometimes you just have to have classroom rules and home rules. Meaning, I had a student, and the parents were very big into, a certain belief about race, and they were adamant about it, and had, I think, even like website posts and things like that. But when the student came to school and started to express some of that, we said, that's not, yet the parents would come in and say, my child can do whatever. And we said, well, no, we can't, we allow them to express in the manner that you're expressing. That you can't come in and say you're whatever because of whatever. So we had the school rules, and how you choose to do this in your home, is that's your, your decision, but that doesn't mean your child can, come in and discriminate, and try to intimidate in others. So, Courtney P. You commented on Allie's post that public education should, here's where I wrote something that kind of went off the paper. I'm guessing always include all students regardless of socioeconomic status, race, gender, disability, etc. So Allie wrote that, you agreed with that. The public education, it should be irregardless of socioeconomic status, race, gender, disability. I agree with those factors. So another part is I had a class with Art Rainwater. Art Rainwater was the superintendent of the Madison Public School District, Madison Metropolitan School District, so Madison, Wisconsin. And when I was picking up my superintendent's license, I had a class with Art down at UW-Madison in my PhD program. And Dr. Rainwater, incredible storyteller, so wonderful class, but gave us an assignment, maybe 20 of us in class, picking up our superintendent's license, and it was to talk about diversity that we had encountered in districts that we had worked in. So we all did the assignment, and then we turned it in, and I remember when they were returned, there was a pause, and then Dr. Rainwater said, not one person mentioned socioeconomic status, SES, as a means to measure diversity. That is a diversity factor. Everyone trended toward race or gender. But he said SES is huge, and generational poverty as being as being factors that that very much can be a barrier to inclusion and can lead to practices of discrimination, things like that. So it was just something that it was strange. We all missed it. Allison P. Allison, you reflected on the inclusion article and wrote, the topic of inclusion has been a hot topic among many school districts. Yes, it has. It's a buzzword, okay? Inclusion's a buzzword. Full inclusion is absolutely the buzz term out there. We are a full inclusion district, which no district can be, and no district should ever be, because that means you are eliminating, by saying that, options on the continuum of least restrictive environment for students with special needs, whether that be disabilities or whether it be English language learner or whatever. But so yeah, it's definitely buzzword. Also, I'm seeing there's a competition. As funding gets tight, there's special education services are mandated. And some of those services, once you include transportation and the fact that the federal level and state level of funding was never what was promised. So you get into this situation where schools might have to cut some classes, like a consumer economics class or a technology class, or what we would call maybe a shop class or something like that, because they have to make cuts where they can to keep a budget balance because of special education transportation costs going up or something like that. So you do have these kind of regular education versus special education things going on, which are fueled partly because of the funding issues, and also these conflicts of Every Student Succeeds Act. ESSA used to be No Child Left Behind, versus idea of ESSA wanting full inclusion, idea saying you need a range of services. So it really puts teachers sometimes in a tough spot, because they try to advocate for, if I'm an English teacher, I'm trying to keep my English program robust. And you almost create these silos because of these situations politically that are put together. So Mitchell R., in response to your, so this is I'm writing this in response to your reflection to Brennan's post on public education. So you wrote a response to that. You wrote, students can go so many ways after school, And yes, absolutely true. And a big part of this is they can go a lot of ways, and you need to teach students how to set goals. Okay. So I think if you want students, so when they get out of school, that they can experience success, they can get on a path to what is in their interest, and then be included productively into society. They need to be able to set goals. All students need to be able to set goals. A peer researcher of mine worked with high school students a year ago. Not one could identify a post-secondary goal. Not one. And just through a qualitative interview, not survey questions, but just sitting down with a sampling of students, students with disability, with and without, and students didn't know the parts of a goal, didn't know how to set baseline, didn't know how to modify a goal, what's a good goal, what's not a good goal, but even saying, like, I'd like to live where it's warm because I like hiking, like as a goal. Well, that starts getting into some things of, well, maybe this is like an area you want to start looking at, and what are the job prospects, and what are some things that you can do down here that you're good at. And stuff like that's really important, in being able to set goals. And I think once we get people to be able to set goals, kids, and actually there's a lot of adults that don't set goals and don't know how either, but once you do that, it sets out there where you can picture yourself beyond where you're at now. So if it is a harder time in high school and you have a goal of saying, here's where in 2 years I think I'm going to be, and here's what I'm going to do to get there in 5, it helps really much more to get out of just this focus on the now, which especially in the social media age where kids are so inundated and reactive and things like that. If you start looking longer, it contributes to positive self-image. So, which means you're going to be happier about school, happier about who you are if you know a direction, and not that doesn't change, but that was an amazing study. Lisa R. Lisa, you had a post about goals of public education and wrote about kids knowing the difference between right and wrong. Something we need to help kids is to understand the difference between right and wrong. I agree. And right and wrong is really gotten to be very subjective. And again, it's kind of the perspective taking. What is right? What is wrong? The media will very much take positions and say this is right and this is wrong, and there is no gray area. That's right and wrong, and that's it. And parents and families will take that too. Something that goes with that, again, I think teaching this art of debate to all kids. I mean, just the fundamentals of trying to understand somebody else's position and why they might have that. Not that you have to agree, but if you're going to try to persuade them, then you can put your argument out there, but understand theirs. So one of the questions that I've had for a while for schools is, should we be teaching youth how to protest in a nonviolent but effective way? Should we be teaching that? And because hey, that can carry over. If you have something happening, in your town, like there's some development of commercial property, but you don't want that to happen because it's going to take some parkland, and that's more important. So what is the way to organize people and to be heard and to do that in a respectful manner? And what do we see, though? We don't see that on TV. We see things like Berkeley, and boy, if you don't like this, right or wrong, if that you position somebody on the wrong side, then this is the response, is to go at them and to throw. It's okay to throw things. Like there was a professor that used a bike lock, one of those U-shaped ones, those heavy things, and hit someone and caused harm to them, a Berkeley professor. I mean, just crazy. So it becomes this thing of how do you express your opinion if you don't agree, but you think it's still just. It's like students who, I remember a high school where they went to a closed campus for noon, and the students protested that. They weren't in favor of that. They wanted to be able to leave campus. They had, some restaurants they went to. They wanted to hang out outside of campus. And so they put together a walkout protest, and they had some signs, and but they did have ways that they did that in a nonviolent way. They didn't come in and smash things at the school and do graffiti and stuff like that. I don't know where that ended up, but and I also know of I was out in California recently, and then it was a group of high school students who were protesting the start time of the school, and they were using medical research and presented these research studies at a school board meeting of saying, high school students perform better later in the mornings and going later into the afternoon. It didn't change things, at least, but they had a solid approach for coming in and anchoring what they were doing into research. So, Kelly S. Kelly, you had much reflection on the School District of Wisconsin Dells versus ZS case, and you asked, at what point does the school district decide it can no longer educate a child within its walls? It's a great question, and you need to be able to have that least restrictive environment. And if the IEP team says we can't provide the services here, and in the Dells case, that was behavior related. But what if you have a student who needs to be taught orientation and mobility and vision skills, a blind student? It might be best that they attend in Wisconsin the Janesville School for the Blind and learn Braille and have the brailing equipment and all of that in the specialist, because some of that you just cannot replicate, and to be with peers who have are visually impaired and communicate articulate things via Braille and things like that. So it's the Dells one again. That's an interesting legal case, because what was happening, and I knew this case from I wasn't directly involved in it. I knew the director who actually left the district as soon as the case was done and became a college professor at a university out east. And I think anyway, the case with this was the district was coming up with different plans, for the student to be successful, and once they get a week or two into a plan, the parent would say, I don't like this anymore, we need to have an IEP meeting, and would try to force the school to change. And eventually what was upheld was the court was saying, well, you got to have time for the plan to work, so you can collect enough data and the child can acclimate to it. And I think came up with some range of like 6 to 8 weeks. Now, that's not hard and fast. You'll never see that anywhere. But basically was backing the school in that, of saying the school needs time to let these plans work. If you change it after 1 or 2 weeks, it's just going to compound these issues. But it was a very interesting case. And one, pointed out is like, you cannot force a child be educated in their home. Like, you can't say, we're going to send someone to your house or 2 teachers to your house and educate the house. Parent can say, no, the house isn't the educational placement, and you cannot override that. I mean, but yeah, it does become very tricky. And the other part on this too, Lisa, is, I worked my director years, is we might find a location, but then how are we going to transport the child? Because I had a parent that was unwilling to transport the child. We would pay for that transportation, and my bus service wouldn't do it because the child would have to be restrained, and it was a bus contract, and they wouldn't do restraints. And I mean, it was just kind of crazy. But you just keep going back, and ultimately you try to put out there options of placement. And this is too where if you get into these situations, you might call in consultants. There are consultants out there that you can call in, independent consultants. They're usually like, retired educators, or retired from the Department of Public Instruction or something like that. They're out there. People in the field know, or if you contact your local CESA, they have people that they can, usually contract out to do a kind of an independent look at this, look at the observe the student, observe the staff, observe the program, and things like that, and maybe give some input. So, Kelly S. Kelly, you had much. Oh, Kelly, my goodness. Guess what, Kelly? I almost got to do shout-outs. Kyle S. Kyle, in response to the WEAC article, okay, if schools don't provide accommodations, they run the risk of exposing themselves to lawsuits for not providing the best education to children. So, all right, true, but actually litigation regarding inclusion is very low. Very, very, very low. So, I mean, there's some court cases out there, but there's just as many court cases of, a student who, didn't make the second rank in the high school because of, whatever grade or something like that. I mean, there's all kinds of, people can sue for anything, but actually, like, suing for special education doesn't happen that often at all. And there's actually a process called due process, which it has to go through and identify procedural error. Like, you can't go back typically ever to an IEP team and say, like, well, you made the wrong decision for the child. If the IEP team comes together and says, this is what we feel the services should be, then as long as they did that in a proper process, had the proper notices with the meeting, held a meeting, got the input, not that the parent has to agree with it, not that, but that the parent participates and gives their input, and this is what the school says, it's what they come up with. The school's on solid footing then, and hopefully the child will make gains from whatever baseline you have, and if they don't, then you need to reconvene your IEP team. But so yeah, I never want anyone to leave this class for fear of being sued, because again, anybody can be sued for anything. Someone could slip on my driveway at Halloween on a candy wrapper and sue me. So, but it's not really it's not the driving force, with the WEAC article. I think the driving force really there is, we want to make sure that people have students are given the best chance they can to be included with their peers. That's really what it comes down to. That's kind of our main point. And I just added off that, like, I've never seen a case of educational malpractice, for example. Rebecca S., and this is where we will wrap up today. Rebecca, in your reaction to the WEAC article, you wrote, how is it that we have so little data behind understanding how special education students learn and affect the world after school? So, yeah, we don't have much data. How? I don't know. Schools are required to do surveys of students that exit surveys. But they're phone surveys, and they kind of like use the last known address, and they try to call like a parent, well, where they moved to or where they at now, and what are they doing, and things like that. So, in students, when they're like seniors, sign this thing like, yes, I can be contacted, after I exit. So they do these exit surveys, but they only tell part of the story. And if you really want to know so there isn't a good way it's getting better in some aspects, because now there's a student identification number. So when students enroll in college, 2-year college, 4-year college, technical school, that number then gets logged back into the state system, that they know that this is where a child is registered. But then you're saying, well, you have to attend college to be successful. It's kind of like this hidden message when you do something like that. I mean, what happens if a child or graduates and they go into the family business? It's a farm, and they're doing really well, and but you call and it's like, did you go on to school? It's like, well, no, I've taken some classes at the about land management and things like that through the UW extension, things like that. But no, because I know what I need to know. And so I think it's really hard. The best way to get information is qualitative. It's actually to go and to meet with people. Now, no one has the money for that and things like this, but actually to sit down and kind of do like the life story of like, what are you doing and what are the barriers? And I mean, because then, I mean, what if, it's like, oh, this student, they didn't do this, and it looked like they were on a path and enrolled, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, like I never knew, because you don't ask these questions and they're sharing with you. Well, like I had a family member who was identified with cancer, so I needed to stay in to be a caregiver. Well, that completely kind of changes then, this story, this person's story. So yeah, I don't know if we're ever going to have really good data, quote unquote good. And, I think we have to be very careful of whatever we get from surveys and just calling people. And there's pressure. I mean, we see it right now in the IEPs for students, individualized education plans, students with disabilities, the heavy emphasis on the, transition plans and getting ready for post-secondary. And it's like, well, post-secondary is not for everybody. And it does, what, Steve Jobs, and I'm just saying it's just one metric. And, and what if you go to post-secondary and, you change your major 5 times? And I mean, I think it's again, I talked about this earlier, and this thing that we don't do is we don't talk about reconnaissance with kids either, just kids in general, and understanding what areas of the country you might like, what job things you might like job shadows and things like that, and interest in just this kind of whole finding out what's out there. And that's the way you find out about yourself and your strengths and things like that. So, all right, we are going to stop. Thank you very much for being active posters. Continue to be active posters. I mean, again, look for 8 to 10, if not more, please post during a module. And again, you have your assignment coming up in this module. You're wide open to do a lot of different approaches on that. You've got some samples. Any questions, please get a hold of me. And enjoying class. I enjoy your posts. We have a lot of students in class, so I'm reading a lot of posts. You might look in the grade book and see some grades have been entered. I entered some of your grades. I don't think all grades have been entered. If you look and there's just a dash, like there's no grade, that means the grade hasn't been entered. If there is a number in there, then I've entered the grade, whether it be 0 or 10 or 20 or whatever it is. So I will post in the class when grades have been posted, but it probably won't be until after the second module here that I'll make a post saying all of the grades have been updated for modules 1 and 2. So if you are, if I have concerns about how you're doing, I've already contacted you. So, and just know if you don't show up in class for like 4 days or something, you'll probably be getting either an email or a phone call from me. So make sure, and again, follow the modules. The modules have the due dates for all of the assignments. They are within the modules, and module 2 is now open. You can go in and start working in module 2. So thank you very much here from down here in the studio. So again, the Fireside chats are probably going to be about this long just because there's 17 of you, and I do hope to continue the individual shout-outs. I think it's important for all of you to hear that, and I think it's important for you to know if you haven't been keeping up with all of your peers posts to me, because there's a lot of posts on what some of your peers are saying in some of their positions. And if you have a thought on something that I've said, please post in the Fireside chat saying, hey, Dave said this, this week, and I agree with it, or I don't agree with it, or here's another way to look at it, and here's a way I'd like to inform the discussion. By all means. Okay. Wishing you the best, and thank you for being in class. Any questions? Contact me. Thank you.